Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Magnetic Podcast. We're super excited to have on Elizabeth Gascoigne from Absence of Proof, founder of Absence of Proof. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining. We're excited to have you today.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Excited to chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so if you don't know, we kind of explained it before this, but Magnetic is just all about exploring passionate brand communities and how they were built. And a big part of Magnetic is exploring things that in brands that were dared to be different or dared to go against the status quo. And that's exactly what attracted those people in. And so I think listening to kind of your story and hearing about what Absence of Proof is all about, I feel like there's a big piece of that at the core of what you do. And we're going to get to all of that. But I first want to give you some time to just explain who you are, how you got here, and kind of what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder of Absence of Proof, which is a national non-alcoholic events company. We also have a D2C marketplace, and we also sell to bars, restaurants, things like that. All non-alcoholic products. So not like juices, but more so non-alcoholic spirits, non-alcoholic beer, wine, that kind of thing. So adult non-alcoholic beverages.
That's awesome. What gave you that idea? Like, how does someone start a non-alcoholic beverage company?
Yeah, it's always funny. I say it's like the most niche thing you can think of. Like when I tell people, they're like, "That's a business," but the community is growing more and more every day. Yeah, it really stemmed from my own personal relationship with alcohol. When I first moved to New York, I was drinking far more than I think I should have, which I think a lot of people kind of fall into in the city. There's a lot of activities in New York, and unfortunately, most of them at least involve alcohol to somewhat. I was noticing like even bottomless brunch, alcohol's involved. Like hanging out in the park, alcohol's involved. There was rarely a time when I was not drinking and socializing, and it just started to add up. My anxiety levels were high. I didn't feel like I was as productive as I could have been in work. I wasn't the best, friend or partner I could have been, and so I was just like, you know what, this does not have a great place in my life. It's not serving me. So, let's remove it and see what happens. And unsurprisingly, completely transformed my life for the better. But the one thing that I was noticing was severely lacking was the social options. And I was like, New York's a huge city. I cannot be the only one that feels like this. So what'll happen if I throw a party that has all the same factors of a party that you'd envision, just with none of the alcohol? So dressing up, photographers, red carpet, all of the glitz and glam of New York, just with none of the alcohol. And the response was just something that I never expected. And that's what got me thinking, like, maybe there's a real need here for community around this. And so we just started throwing more and more events in New York. We started getting a lot of messages from other cities of like, I wish this happened in our city. So that's when we started launching in other communities. And yeah, now we're active in 9 cities and have grown like a marketplace and sales channels as well. So it's been the most rewarding experience, and it's really cool to be able to work on something that I believe just can add a lot of value to someone's life, even if you're not completely alcohol free. I think everybody can get behind a message of moderation and being intentional with your consumption.
Yeah, I personally feel very connected to your mission. I'm someone that was in the same boat. Definitely drank a lot, and like also when I say this, I don't have anything against drinking, as I'm sure you don't either. I think it's just a matter of wanting more options for going out and not feeling like. I think the biggest reason I drank, honestly, because I don't sleep very well when I drink. That was the biggest thing. And then I felt awful, and I work Saturdays, as you know, like as a founder, you're working all the time, and so it was more just like something I did so that I could avoid the awkward, hey, are you an alcoholic? When people were
Yeah.
wondering why I didn't drink. And it's amazing though when you stop. So I've stopped drinking for the most part, I think like for special occasions, but it's amazing how I think recently, and maybe you've been a part of this movement, but I just feel like there's been a very strong movement towards people like not drinking and it being now like cool. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Is that something that's like you've noticed? Is that newer? Is that becoming a bigger movement?
Totally. It's so funny you say that because I stopped drinking for the first time when I was 18. Um, Again, just really to get my life together. And at that point was just like not prioritizing the right things. And at that point, you were not cool if you didn't drink. Like it was the same
Yeah.
questions like, oh, you have a problem, or like, oh, we have to be careful around her, all of these things. And now when you say you don't drink, one, I think people don't even say like, there's not a second thought, or it's like, that's actually cool that you don't drink because you're prioritizing other things. And like you mentioned, like the founder community, I was at a dinner the other day of founders, and there was one person at a table of 12 that drank alcohol. Like it was really amazing. And no
Wow.
one had a problem. No one had a negative history. It was just like, this is not additive to my life. So I think that there's a lot of that. I also think that Gen Z in particular is a very like pro mental health generation and very, like about breaking generational trauma and all these things. And I've posted a lot on social media, basically soliciting feedback from Gen Z of like, why is it that you don't drink? And a lot of them say like health and wellness, but also have witnessed negative, they just had negative experiences with their parents and alcohol. So that was actually, it's more of a sad topic, but I think in general, Gen Z is just saying like, I don't really need this anymore.
Yeah, and how does so your background, I was curious. So you started with like an event. It sounded like that was sort of the catalyst for building this brand around that, after realizing there was a lot of people super passionate about it. Before you threw that event though, what was your background? Like were you in events or what did you do before that?
No, events are actually, they were so new to me. And if you had come to my first event, you would know that they were so new to me. But I was at Amazon advertising for 4.5 years prior
Okay.
to starting this, which is why I was so excited to chat with you because marketing is like my bread and butter. Like I love the marketing funnel and all of that. And so I did absence of proof nights and weekends for 7 months, before I had the revenue to quit. Which was challenging. I think any founder can kind of relate to those early days. But I think that those skills that I learned at Amazon are really directly applicable and use them every day here. I think, every founder needs to know how to market.
Being at Amazon, and I'm sure you worked with a lot of traditional businesses, I think one of the things on this show that has come up a lot is this idea of the traditional model of building a brand is you build the product and then you build the distribution. And I think what we're seeing a lot, especially with creator brands, Mr. Beast is one that like just pops up constantly. He built the distribution and then built the product. It sounds to me like there was a little bit of that with absence of proof, where you didn't necessarily have like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't necessarily have a product, but you started with like the community and like building that. Is that the case? And what can brands learn from that? I think is the next question I have.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. That's exactly how I thought about things. And I think that it's just based on my experience in the CPG advertising world. Like I knew how much dollars go into building brands from the product first. And if you have the capital and you have the funding, I think that it's totally doable. That was not something that I had. I was a first time founder. I had no idea if there was any legs to this business at all. And so my like propensity to go raise a bunch of money to try to build something was just not going to be what I thought would be successful. And so I wanted to build the community first and test the market first. And so, yeah, it started with events and we didn't sell product. All we did was throw events. And then from there, we secured brand partnerships, which was helping to kind of drive revenue. And then from there, we did launch ecom, which is kind of like fueling the funnel for people that aren't familiar with the advertising funnel, like starting with awareness and then moving people down to conversion. So the awareness part of our business is the community and the events and that stuff. And then you also tell people like, oh, by the way, if you liked any of these products, you can buy from us here. So it is that reversing of the sales pipeline that I think has been really effective for us and saved us a lot of money. We're still 100% bootstrapped. So yeah, it's been really effective for us.
There's a bunch of really good nuggets in there. I think one of the things I'd love for you to do is talk a little about, you mentioned marketing funnel, and a lot of people that listen to this, they hear marketing funnel and like they get excited. And I'd love for you to explain though, how do you think about the marketing funnel as it like with absence of proof as opposed to maybe some more traditional kind of ways of thinking about a marketing funnel?
Yeah. So I think the way, and I'm sure everyone has kind of different definitions depending on what textbook you read, but when I think about
Hmm.
marketing funnel, I think about just the path that a customer follows to ultimately purchase a product. And so if you're thinking about, purchasing a Coca-Cola product, if you've never heard of Coca-Cola, it's probably going to take a fair amount of impressions or viewpoints or touch points with Coca-Cola for you to earn trust with that brand to ultimately purchase the product. And so it's the same with non-alcoholic products. I would say even more so because the industry is so new. A lot of people don't even know that non-alcoholic rum exists. So getting someone from not even knowing that it exists to actually spending, their hard-earned money on it is a very long process. And so for me, like traditional marketing, I think is like, let's spend money on upper funnel advertising strategies like, streaming TV or TV ads or any of these things, which are great and effective. They're incredibly expensive. And so for me, I was like, how can I get the same amount of impressions, the same amount of visibility that I would from traditional advertising for next to nothing? And the answer was community events and social media. And so any new founder, if you're not leaning into social media, like today, like as you're listening, pause and go start, because it is free marketing, and the reach and the scale that you're going to get from social media versus even something you'd pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for is just, it's insane when you look at the numbers. So we leaned heavily into social media early. That was how we gained awareness for our events. And then from there, it was really word of mouth and building trust based on the experience that our customers had at events. So people, we really leaned into like kind of like not like a secret community, but like if you know kind of thing. And so we had events at speakeasies, and we opened like really cool non-alcoholic bars underground and things like that. And so people would come and be like, that experience was so cool. And then they would bring their friends the next time. So it grew in a really organic way that way.
That's awesome. What was one of the secrets, like when you were first starting out, you had, I think the event you mentioned was kind of like the first catalyst to this, but is there any cool stories around how you guys were able to grow so rapidly so early?
TikTok. It's like so cheesy, but I was literally making TikToks all day, every day in my apartment. It started with non-alcoholic recipes. And so like how to make a non-alcoholic gin and tonic and how to make all of that, because we hadn't done any events. And what's so funny is actually my biggest partner today is a brand called Ritual Zero Proof, and they make non-alcoholic gin, rum, tequila. And their director of sales, who's now a good friend of mine, he saw one of those really early TikToks and it had like, I don't know, 100 views or something. And he reached out and he was like, hey, I really like what you're talking about. Like, let's get on a call. And again, I knew nothing about the industry at that point. And we chatted and he was like, can I send you like 200 bottles of these to give to your attendees just as gifts? And I was like, yeah, you can. And then from there, like our partnership has just really blossomed and now they're huge sponsors. And so anyway, shout out to them. But yeah, I think just like posting as much as I possibly could. And then once I started throwing events, documenting those events on TikTok and being like, this is what it's actually like to party without alcohol and it actually can be fun and all of that, I think adds a lot of surprise value for people that aren't familiar with the space.
So a lot of people that listen to that, I think, and this was me maybe 6 months ago, they hear TikTok and they immediately think like, oh man, like I can't do that. Like that is not me. What is like I guess a practical way? Like first question is more, did that come natural to you or was that something that you had to learn?
So it's so funny because I think I've tried to be an influencer like 15 times in my life for like different like verticals, and it's never really stuck. Like I have tried to scrub the internet of my old influencing because it's so embarrassing. But I do feel like the more you put yourself out there, the more desensitized you get to putting yourself out there. And like of course, like I still go to film TikTok someday and I'm like, is this really my life? Like am I really sitting here in front of a camera being like, come to my non-alcoholic party? Like it just feels so cringy sometimes. But once you start getting traction and people actually start resonating with your message, that's when I think it comes easier because you're like, oh, I'm actually putting something good into the world. Like the amount of messages I've gotten from people being like, I was so afraid to try removing alcohol, and like seeing you have fun in New York City without that was like the push that I needed. That stuff is way more fulfilling to me than like, the haters, because the haters will come for sure. But yeah.
Yeah, I relate to that so much. Like I think social media is something that just deeply terrifies me. I do love social media in the sense of like being the kind of person that sees other people on it, and I love to like consume content. But when it came to like putting myself out there, especially with my business, which was very much I tried to build sort of in the quiet, and I didn't really want that to like get in the way of my personal life. That was always a huge challenge for me, and I think to your point, though, I think the more that I did it, honestly, in the beginning, thankfully, I have Jake from Thursday Labs who like just takes care of the content and then pushes it out. So like, I just don't necessarily need to be deeply involved in it, and it can kind of just do its thing. But I think like over time, you just start to realize like, all right, like my friends know like who I am, like the people I care about know who I am. And there's always going to be people that are like, wait, this guy's so cringe. I see him every day on LinkedIn. But the reality is like now I think I enjoy it more because conversations like this, like I truly do find a lot of value in meeting new people and exploring new things, talking to people who are smarter than me. And so that's what I hang my hat on is like, all right, like I do enjoy this, like these conversations, and great, let's repurpose that things that I enjoy into formats that maybe feel a little bit less comfortable to me, and know that like my heart is in the right place and it's ultimately doing good. So I
Yeah.
sympathize with that a ton, and I'm still learning a lot, but it's a super powerful thing, social media. And it sounds like that's something you guys have really tapped into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, for anyone that's kind of like nervous to put yourself out there, like one, if you're a founder, like you're working your butt off every single day, and the monetary and like growth of a brand that can come literally overnight from something that goes viral, it makes everything worth it. You also never know who's watching. And I have a story about this actually. So, our largest partnership to date was with the New York Mets this past summer. And we did like a 4-day non-alcoholic beer garden basically with them. It was a total blast, craziest experience of my life. They ended up expanding the mocktail menus throughout the whole stadium, like just such a huge win for us. And that happened because the owner of the New York Mets saw an Instagram reel that I posted. And so
Wow.
when you're going to post that, like you never know who's watching, and you never know who's going to resonate with what you're saying. And the majority of people, even if they think what you're doing is cringe, like they have their own lives that they're worrying about, they're going to scroll right past it. But then like the upside is that someone is like, wow, like I never thought about something like this. Like she literally DM'd me on Instagram and was like, can we talk about bringing this to the stadium? And that's a room that I never would have been in had I not put myself out there and like risked the cringe or the embarrassment.
Yeah, that's so good. That's also something I think so many people need to hear. So I'm glad that you have such a good perspective on it, and you have a good story on the other side of that. I think is also great because people, they hear constantly get on social media, get on social media. But I think a lot of times on these podcasts, they don't hear about those stories of like, hey, I saw your TikTok with 200 views. Like how often does that happen? So
Yeah.
that's amazing. Um, okay. So I'm, an e-commerce brand, or I'm a founder, and I'm like, all right, I want to do more TikTok, social media. Is there any like tips you would have just for them, like step one, just like going from 0 to 1 for them, like whether it's type of content or just like how to get something out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people really overthink it because they want to protect the brand, which I totally understand. But I think that the content that does go more viral is like just you talking to the camera, or like doing things that are imperfect, or making a cocktail recipe and messing up and talking about like why you would do it differently. Like the organic stuff is what makes people connect to you. And so I think the brands that have done the best job of growing their brand presence have really put people first rather than product, and not led with selling. No one at the end of the day, like people are not going to buy your product unless they really have a why to buy your product, particularly if you're in a saturated category. And so like what makes not just the product outstanding, but what makes the people behind the product outstanding, and really telling those stories, I think is impactful.
That's great. So moving forward, I think you guys have had a tremendous amount of success building the community. It sounds like there were some really unique ways that you did that. As far as the future of Absence of Proof, like what are some things that you're excited about for next year when it comes to continuing to grow that community, continuing to do more of that social media element? Like, is there any kind of things that you're looking forward to?
I mean, so much. I think the events are always the bread and butter of what we do because that's our community. And so making sure that those events, continue to improve and scale and get bigger and better and, more elevated, I think is a huge goal for me. We're doing an event with Shopify in January, which is really exciting because that's the first one that we'll actually be selling product at. So that's like a direct, kind of like seeing the dream come to fruition of like starting with the community and then having the community be able to shop. So I'm excited for that. The other thing that I'm really focused on is like we have created these completely alcohol free spaces, but what about the people who want to go out with their friends and their friends are not sold on the non-alcoholic thing? Like I feel like we are losing those people because if they can't get their friends to come, they might feel socially intimidated to come to something alone. And so a big goal of mine is how do we make sure that every bar, restaurant, and quote unquote normal place that you would go out also has elevated non-alcoholic options. So that's a big kind of push for me is working with those places. We're doing a lot of menu design, a lot of menu consulting for non-alc. And so I can't share quite yet where those will be, but I'm really excited about some of the venues that we're working with. And hopefully that'll just make it so that everyone can feel included.
Yeah, I also like the fact that you're already thinking about like being intentional around avoiding the opposite thing happening, where like initially it was like if you don't drink, you know, you suck, to like now, in the future, let's say that everybody stops drinking and then you run into like, oh, you drink, like that's disgusting. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that you're thinking about that because I think that's super important. It's not about this is wrong or this is right. It's about like just being accepting of who people are and like their choices, and just like creating a space where people can have fun together, I think. And that's awesome.
Thank you. That's been a huge intentional marketing push for us too, is like we never want to make anybody feel judged. Like no one wants to be told like you shouldn't drink. Like that it's not
Mhm.
the vibe. No one wants to be told what to do and not to do. And on a personal stance, I don't care. I mean, like my partner drinks. Like I have no moral judgment on alcohol or no alcohol. I just want everyone to be able to make their own choices for what's serving them in their own life. And providing options is how you do that. And so, at events, we say everyone is welcome, whether you're taking a night off of drinking, a week off of drinking, or a lifetime off of drinking, like you're welcome here. And even expanding that to like, you don't even have to take the night off of drinking, just like, let's have options.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the product side. So it's with the Shopify, it sounds like there's some really cool things happening there. Do you guys, so are you guys, is the future or the vision, if you can share this, is that to have kind of a curated kind of set of non-alcoholic, kind of elevated bottles that you can buy from the website, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so we currently have an e-commerce platform. I would compare it similarly to Amazon, where brands can list their product and then customers can
Okay.
purchase all of their non-alcoholic options. So we do have that. I think it's really just like has not been the forefront of my bandwidth, to be honest. And so 2024 is really about growing that and scaling that and raising awareness of that platform.
Yeah. And with the events, so it sounds like that's really where you guys are focused on, is how do you scale that? I think
Mhm.
that's a challenge I'm really interested to get your thoughts on, because the word scale and events oftentimes are almost feel like they're at odds with each other.
Yeah.
At least, there's brands listening that are like, how do I scale this like personal connection? What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you think about scaling this idea of events, especially
Yeah.
elevated experiences?
Yeah. I think for us, it's how do we bring this experience to as many people as possible? And what that's looked like for us is just expanding cities. So we host non-alcoholic parties all over the country now, and reach, the communities in each city that are interested in that. And so it's not necessarily having bigger events in every city. Like some of our cities, we still have events that are like 30 people. But it's about like the depth of those relationships and like, are we getting repeat customers? Because, um, as we all know, like the lifetime value of a customer who's really sold on you is much higher than a customer who just like in passing purchases once. So yeah, I think for us, we look at events as marketing. They do drive revenue and they are profitable, which I'm thankful for, but they are never going to be like this, you know, billion-dollar business. However, they support the community that ultimately purchases too. So I think that's really important. So we just think about it as our marketing strategy, and we're less uptight about them making a lot of money, which is what I would encourage any sort of product or brand to think about. Is like events are marketing, so event budgeting should be penciled into your regular marketing budget. Yeah.
What specifically with events is, when you're thinking about curating them and where to put them and how to host them, like what are some key things you're thinking about in terms of like that experience, if you have any?
Yeah, definitely. I think keeping things new and exciting for our community is really important. When I first started hosting events, I basically just assumed that you could put everybody in a room with no alcohol and assume they would get along. And unfortunately, that's not the case. You really have to be intentional about curating an experience that's exciting and different, and fosters connection without alcohol, because a lot of people could be more, socially tentative when they're arriving at an event, and don't have the like social lubricant of alcohol. So we try to, well, there's a couple things. So the first is that keeping our events really new and exciting, like and random. So like we did a goat happy hour 2 weeks ago where we literally brought in like 15 goats and mocktails, and it was like the most random but like fun experience and memorable experience. And like we got so many messages being like that was the randomest thing I've ever been to, but like I'm a lifelong fan, like that kind of thing. And then also, like, we started to look at the demographics of our community and thinking about where are these people spending their free time when they're not at an absence of proof event, and how can we bring those aspects of things they already love into our community and kind of like marry the two things together. And so a lot of our community, unsurprisingly, is very into health and wellness. And so we started doing like ice bath events and like yoga mocktail wellness festivals in LA, and all of that type of thing. And that's been really well received because they can kind of do two things that they love at the same time. It's also been a really great way for us to grow our audience and community because every time you partner with another events company or business, you're reaching their folks as well.
What's one thing when you've done these events, because at this point you probably are becoming a veteran at them. What's one thing though that you've like learned, or one lesson that brands can kind of take from maybe something that you thought would work well that didn't, or maybe something that was just a massive headache? If you have a fun story too, would love to hear that.
Yeah, let me think about that. I mean, I think this is like so tangible, so feel free to not put this in. But I think for us, like staffing, like making sure just like the details of events, like events are so detail oriented, and I did not know that starting out. I was like, I've thrown a party before, like it's fine, people will show up, but you really need to write out every single detail of the event. And like my team like laughs at me because I literally will write out minute to minute what people should be doing. Like 6:15, this person is at the door, this is your line when you greet people, this is how you make people feel welcome. That's another big thing, is like the actual contents of the event matter a lot less than like how somebody feels when they're leaving your event. And so everything in your event should be designed around making somebody feel welcomed, like they made new friends, all of those things. And even if like they don't like your mocktails, if they met someone new that they now have a friendship or a relationship with, they're going to think that your event was awesome. And so like all of our staff is very encouraged to be friendly, ask people like how they heard about the event, and all of that. Does that help your question? I don't know if I have a specific example.
No, that's definitely good.
Okay.
I think just a lot of brands don't know exactly where to start, and sometimes telling them what not to do can help them get started.
Yeah,
Because
I
I feel
think,
like, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I think like event organization and planning and also like event promotion. Event promotion is still my biggest headache every single day, is like, how do we make sure people show up to this thing? Because people have busy lives and you're competing with a lot of other really fun things to do, particularly in New York or LA. There's just a lot going on. Um, so figuring out those strategies is always tough.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned like people are busy, they have a lot of things going on. I think that's a huge thing that brands are struggling with right now, is kind of there's so much noise in the consumer space. And with social media, I mean, you mentioned it, but it's a very swipe culture in terms of just consuming content. Um, you guys at Absence of Proof, you have a very powerful story that you're telling, and I think that that cuts through a lot of that noise. How have you cultivated like that very authentic story in your messaging, in your events? Like, I'm just curious because a lot of brands are struggling right now to have their story even resonate, let alone even be heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's helpful because like I ride or die this message. Like this is the way that I live my life. So
Mm,
it's easy to get behind something that like you truly passionately believe. I think like this is just a more message on entrepreneurship. I think when you start a company with the goal of selling the company or like scaling quickly enough, or if money is like the ultimate thing, I think you're going to lead with product. I think you're going to lead with selling, which comes across sometimes inauthentic to the customer who you need to buy your product. But when you come at it like, this thing has changed my life truly, and my genuine goal for this is to share it with as many people as possible. I think that comes across a lot more effectively. And so I think before you even start the company, like getting the why down, and like you have to ride or die your why, even when other people say it's the stupidest thing ever. Like when I started posting TikToks and getting like maybe 100 views, I got so many comments being like, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Like, why would anybody do this? Like, this is basically like having a restaurant without food. Like, why would you have a bar without alcohol? All of those things." And until you have the positive affirmation, the only thing that's going to keep you going on the mission is like your own self affirmation of "I believe this so much." And I think that most founders have that, or else they wouldn't have, worked so hard to create what they're creating. And so lead with that. Like, get the founder in front of the camera and like talk about why did you sacrifice the cushiness of a corporate job to go on this really hard journey? And typically that story is powerful enough to get somebody else on board.
yeah, that's so good. A lot of lessons in there, I think, for founders. I think one of the big things, though, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on, is people whenever you're public about yourself and what you're doing and you're kind of putting yourself in front, I think there's an element of vulnerability there. How important is vulnerability when it comes to not just founders, but I mean, as a marketer, as a business owner?
Yeah, I mean, so important. I think, early on, some of my most biggest like TikTok videos were just me in front of the camera talking about like my own journey and my own story. I think the podcasts that have done the best are the same thing of like you said, like people sharing their genuine story of how they came to create what they want to create. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown, but she is like a very large researcher on vulnerability. And she has this concept of like people need to earn your vulnerability, which I agree with in certain respects of like you need to trust somebody to trust them with a part of you. And I think when you're on social media, it's like the opposite, where like you are literally exposing yourself to people who you know are going to be really awful to you online. And so it's just like this, I don't know, cost benefit analysis, like anything else of like, is this worth the potential is it worth the potential growth of like resonating with X thousands of people with like 10 people being really not happy with it? Usually the answer to me is yes. But yeah, it's hard. And it's also like, I think that people need to understand that it's completely valid to have emotional reactions to negativity online. Like, we're not robots. It sucks to have people that are awful to you online. It's a very vulnerable thing. And no one's saying that it's easy. I think like you can watch like Gary Vee, who's like the social media king, right? And be like, oh, he makes it look so easy. But I'm sure even he has days of being like, that sucked that this person said that, or this person thinks that. It sucks, and I'm going to continue to do it. And that's like the key part.
Yeah, that I feel like too. I think there's lessons to learn. Like even if you're a founder that doesn't want, because I think there's this idea of like the founder-led brands. Um, they're very like I think that's a very successful model. But I think it's also important to remember like there are other ways to show vulnerability with your company or with your product. I'm reminded of there was a statistic, and this was recent, but people want to see how the cookie's made. Like they want to see behind the scenes, and I think that doesn't always necessarily have to mean like the founder. I know that in your case, right, like you've really led with that. In my case, I've tried to do that as well. But I think there's some companies that are listening that are like, listen, that's just not me. Like my private life is my private life. But I think there's still lessons to learn for those folks. So it's like, hey, if you can't show them how you were made, like, the behind the scenes of you, like show them behind the scenes of, how the product's made, show them the struggles of some of the people that are working there, show them the inner workings of the meetings. And like, that doesn't necessarily have to be a vulnerability shared by the founder, but it could be a vulnerability shared by the company. So I think that I want to make sure people listening, if they fall into the bucket that's like, listen, I'm just not capable of doing that, that's totally fine. But there's lessons I think to learn from you, that it's like, okay, well, how can you use vulnerability? It might not be yourself. It might be in the way that you talk to customers. It might be in your messaging or in how you build your product. Let that show through.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I think that's a really important call out. I think that there's also some really great brands who, I have no idea who the founder is, but all of their online presence is still very people oriented, whether it's their customers, their marketing is showing, people interacting with their product rather than like, here's this beautiful can. I think as marketers, like we can kind of like nerd out on that and be like, wow, that is such a beautiful, product that was created. But if you're the average consumer, like you are thinking about everything else in your life and you're going to resonate with something where it's like, I want to feel how those people on that social media campaign or whatever are feeling. Is that product going to help me feel that way? So yeah, I completely agree. I think just making it like as human as possible, particularly not to get on this whole tangent, but particularly in like the age of AI, I think that's what really will make brands stand out.
Yeah, I almost want to double click into that a little bit, even though I know that that can be a can of worms. How do you think about sort of like the future landscape? I think you've kind of placed your bets in certain areas around how you want to build community and reach your customers. How does AI factor into that, or and we could make it more generally, like as future technology continues to develop, what are some ways that you're thinking about how to use those technologies to further enhance what you're already doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think AI is like so exciting. I think it's so incredible, like just that it exists at all. And I'm sure there are people that are much more qualified to talk about like tangible tools of how to incorporate it into your business. Um, I think for me, like one thing that I'm really grateful for about being a founder in 2023 versus 1950 is that there are so many free, easy, cheap resources that can help you grow and scale a business without a ton of funding or capital. And I think that it's really made it so that most people, if they're listening to this podcast, most people have at least somewhat of a resource to do what it takes to start their business. And I think the AI is going to make that even more so. Like, I think that it will even out things across educational backgrounds, language barriers, anything like that. I think it's going to be amazing. I think it'll make things move a lot more quickly. For us, we have virtual assistants, and I obviously encourage my team to use AI whenever they feel like it's applicable with editing and all of the disclaimers involved. I think that it's a really good like inspiration driver too. I mean, like you can literally ask ChatGPT, like, I'm stuck. I had a, whatever low motivation day. Can you help me with this task? And like, it will help you with that task. And so I think that it can kind of filter out for our human moments of just not feeling motivated to build. And it can help in those moments as well.
Yeah, I like this term because I've been thinking about this a lot, but accelerating, not automating. I like that
Mm.
phrase just because I think of AI as sort of this thing that humans can use to do more and be more and go farther, as opposed to something that uses humans or something that like removes humans in terms of automation. And I think sometimes people can fall in the trap of like AI, well, that means automate. It certainly can. But I think the best businesses are the ones that are finding ways to accelerate what they're doing instead of completely replacing like that human element of their brand, which at least for the next 5 years, I mean, hopefully that doesn't go anywhere, and I don't think it will. So I hope that brands kind of lean into that mentality of it's like it's less about like okay the X's and O's. It's more about approaching it like new technology from a standpoint of like how can we use this to make our brand better, to reach customers faster, to do what we're doing better, as opposed to like, how can I just automate away elements of our business? I don't necessarily know that that's the right path for using something like AI.
Totally. I think it also just like really narrows into the point. I think it's YC. It's one of the big accelerators that talks about like building things that don't scale first. And I think it's just like really something to pay attention to as a founder is like the things that quote unquote don't scale, like events, are the things that are quote unquote AI proof as well. Bringing together community, that's really hard for AI to replicate. And those are your customers, the people in your community. So I think it's just even more reason to lean into those like in-person types of things.
Amazing. So we're coming up on the end. I want to ask some sort of rapid fire questions here.
Yay.
The first being first time founder. I love asking this. Is just like, what's one thing that you weren't expecting that came with becoming a first time founder? And then the second thing is, what's the biggest thing you've learned?
Oh my gosh, wasn't expecting this is like such an unglamorous answer. I did not know how much overhead was going to be involved in this whole thing, like how much accounting software costs, how much insurance costs, like how much my health insurance costs, just like all of those really hard things. And so when I talk to people who are thinking about quitting their job, like you need to be really realistic about your expenses because life gets a lot more expensive as a founder, and sometimes it takes a lot of time to bring in the revenue that you were before you quit. But for more fun things, it was what I had learned is that
Yeah, the second one was just like biggest thing you've learned.
I mean, I think that it's just like I'm such a believer in the growth mindset now. Like I don't know if it's delusional, but like since starting a company, like there are very few things that I think that I can't do. Like I just feel like it's like if you really do put your mind to something, like I'm going to make it happen, and I didn't have that level of confidence before I started this company. And so I think I've just learned that like there's really nothing that I want to build that I feel incapable of building. And I think that it takes actually building something that was hard to build to give yourself that confidence.
Yeah, that one resonates big with me. I think for me, it's similar. It's the sense of like I used to be much more in love with outcomes and like the end goals. Like my background in sports, I think that can tend to wire your brain where you're always thinking about, oh, I want to get to like a national championship, and so that's like all you think about. I think that for me as a founder, one of the biggest things it's taught me and that I love about it is it's made me fall more in love with like the day to day and the inputs. And once that happens, like it's almost like a switch. Like you just start to really enjoy like the day to day. And then it's almost like, well, it doesn't matter, like the outcomes will come. Like it doesn't matter what industry, what product, what you're doing. Like if that's your mindset every day, eventually like you're going to find success in it. So I resonate with that. That's sort of like a big piece that I've definitely learned as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think also just like the people that you meet when you join the founder community are just like you just meet so many amazing people who are so passionate about what they're doing. And I've learned so much about like the randomest industries because I've met people that are also building things in those spaces. So, yeah, it's just a really exciting thing. And like you said, like I wake up every day. This is going to sound cheesy, but like it's genuinely how I feel. And I'm like, I get to build something. Like, what a privilege that like I get to wake up and build something that I love. Like, who cares if anyone ever buys it? Like, as long as I have a roof over my head and people that love me, like, and I get to build something, that's the greatest gift I could ever ask for.
Yeah, and it's funny though because if you try to tell, like I have a lot of friends and family, and if you haven't had that mindset shift, that can be kind of like weird to hear. You can be like, all right, man, like okay, like sometimes people look at me when I say that because I genuinely am like, oh, like today we just failed at like six things. It was amazing. And they're
Yeah,
like, okay, is that fake? And like maybe once upon a time it was fake for me, but now it's the most real thing ever. Like I just genuinely love the day to day of like building. And that's why it's gotten so much easier because I've been doing this now for, almost 3 years. And there was definitely years, the first few years where I was so outcome focused and I was so focused on like whatever it was at the end, and that was just burning me out. And then all of a sudden, like when your mindset shifts to like the day to day, it's just so much more enjoyable as well.
totally. And I think like once you get some of like those quote unquote tangible wins that you were really striving for, and then you realize like, oh, I feel the exact same. Like it's not actually this big thing that you thought it was going to be. It didn't actually change the way you feel about yourself or your business. Then you're like, oh, so it really is the climb. Like it really is the journey that is the reward. Which yeah, it just makes like I didn't know you could love your 40 hours. I really didn't until I did this. So
Yeah, that's well, especially when the feedback you get in college. I don't know if this was you, but when I was in college, every time somebody would come back, like an alumni, they would always say these like, "Hey man, enjoy it. Like these are the best
I
years of
know,
your
right?
life." Like they're like, "Listen, dude, like yeah, it's tough out there. You know, you're gonna have a job you hate. You might be in a relationship you hate." And you hear that constantly, and you start to think, well, like, man, maybe these are the best years of my life. And once again, it sounds cheesy, but genuinely, I think that's such a mistake. People like, there's so much more out there if you're willing to like take the risk, be vulnerable, share on social media, build a TikTok. Like that's exactly how you find those things that bring you enjoyment.
Totally. I know. I can't. Yeah. I those are. It's so funny because I like can picture the exact people who are like saying that. Even like parents. Like it's good intentioned, but like and they're doing it out of self protect or of like protecting you of like they want to make sure you're financially stable and all these things, but you're just told a lot. I feel like on one side people tell you like to follow your dreams, but then when you're like I'm following my dreams, they're like, oh wait, don't actually like don't do that when it's risky or scary or whatever. Um, yeah, so you got to be so sure that it's what you want because you can't bank on anyone else, really, really, um, I don't know, endorsing it as much as you will.
Yeah. And the mindset that you have is one that isn't just, it's not, it's earned. I mean, it's built over time. So I think that's the other thing. If you're listening and you're like, whoa, like that sounds like something I want. It's like, well, it does take a lot of time before that switch kind of triggers. I don't know. Maybe for some people it is immediate, but I do think there's an element of like head down learning. And then once it clicks, it gets a little bit easier. But a lot of people can kind of fade out in that initial year or two when they're trying to learn that motion or muscle.
Totally. And there's a lot of bad days too. I will say it's like the highs are so much higher than when I was at corporate and the lows are so much lower. Like,
Mm,
and you just kind of have to be willing to ride those waves and know that like the lows are temporary, just like everything in life. But if you're not used to that, like, yeah, I mean, we're a year and a half in, but like, yeah, I mean, there's still days where I was like, did I really like, was this a choice that I made to feel this way? Like how, why would I make that? And then the next day you're like back on cloud nine. So yeah, it's just something you gotta experience, I think.
Amazing. Well, honestly, this has been an awesome episode. I know there's going to be so many people that get a ton out of this. We're excited to see your brand grow as well. Me in particular, like I'm envisioning one day going to a bar and grabbing some elevated non-alcoholic beverages
Yes.
because right now mostly I'm doing carbonated water with a lime. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. People that want to get in touch with you or want to follow you or kind of support you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is where we post all of our events, but this is more business minded. So feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'm trying to post more on there as well. So yeah, I would love to connect.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time and have an awesome rest of your week.
Thanks so much, Jared.